Welcome to the Docketing Excellence webinar series, which is sponsored by Black Hills IP and the SLW Institute. Black Hills IP is an accurate, efficient, and cost-effective US-based IP docketing and paralegal service provider. The SLW Institute is an educational group created by the Schwegman Lundberg Wissner firm, which aims to provide insightful and useful information to the IP community. For this webinar series, we have pulled together docketing experts and managers from the Schwegman firm, Black Hills IP, and their respective clients and customers to help educate on key docketing challenges and issues and share best practices on how to overcome them. The Docketing Excellence webinar series is free. There are about 2 webinars per month through May 2017. To see a complete list of webinar topics and to register for future webinars, go to the Black Hills IP website, which is www.blackhillsip.com. The webinar that we are presenting today is the 9th in the series. Today's topic is annuity payment failure modes. We have allowed time for questions at the end of the webinar. Questions may be submitted using the Q&A button on the control bar on your screen. You can submit a question at any time during the presentation. The question will be held in a queue until the end of the presentation. The presenters today are myself, Jackie Spurtell, and Carol Wells. I'm Ann McCracken, the president of Black Hills IP. I'm a patent attorney with 19 years experience in patent prosecution. I was a partner at the Schwegman firm for 10 years, and I also was a full-time law professor and directed the patent prosecution program at Franklin Pierce Law Center, which is now part of the University of New Hampshire, for 5 years. Jackie, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Jackie Spurtell. I'm a patent analytics specialist with Black Hills IP. In a former role, I was in-house patent counsel for Thomson Reuters. I've had experience moving data from one docketing system to another, and also having the pleasure of going through that docketing system and making sure annuity information was up to date for annuity purposes.
Great. Carol, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Ann. Hi, I'm Carol Wells. I'm the annuity specialist with Black Hills IP. I have a bachelor's degree in paralegal studies and 4 years annuity experience.
Great, thank you, Carol. Annuity docketing errors are renowned for exposing an organization to extreme liability, but these errors usually don't occur where one would expect. This webinar will focus on the vulnerabilities in the annuity docketing process. And because our audience has varying levels of experience in docketing and annuities, we're going to start with setting the background and the stage, and then get into the weeds a little deeper in some of the later topics. Today we'll be discussing the following: the stakeholders in the renewal process, the typical architectures of a renewal system, how annuity payment instructions are collected, and then where things can go wrong in the annuity payment system, and methods for guarding against missed annuity payments. But before we go into the first topic, I want to comment on the usage of our term renewal. I know the word renewal has a special meaning in the trademark field. We're not talking about trademark renewals today. Rather, we're using the term renewal in a generic sense to refer to any type of patent maintenance fee, annuity, or tax charged by a government patent office. There's some variation in the terminology from country to country. For example, the US calls it a maintenance fee. In Europe and many other foreign countries, it's called an annuity, but not in Canada. There, it's still called a maintenance fee. So we use the term renewal as a generic term to encompass any payment that must be made to keep a patent, or in some cases, a patent application, in force. Let's start with the stakeholders in the process. First, the orange block in this diagram represents the individual or the group within the organization that has the knowledge about the value of the patent. They're the decision maker regarding whether or not the next annuity payment is to be made. And this could be an R&D group, an inventor, a business unit officer, a patent committee, maybe a licensee. In some cases, in a small organization, maybe it's even the patent attorney. So that's one stakeholder. Another stakeholder, represented by the yellow block, is the individual who has to communicate that decision regarding the payment to the annuity payment manager. That's the company representative who is transferring that decision or the information about that decision along to the party who's going to be responsible for making the payment. The third block, the blue block, is what I'm referring to as the annuity payment manager. This could be a law firm, or this could be a commercial annuity payment service. Another party that I just want to mention, because it'll come up later in our discussion, that can come into play is the foreign agent who's responsible for making the payment in the particular country, or maybe even who is just listed as the correspondence contact for a particular patent, even if they weren't the one to make the payment. For example, if an annuity payment is missed, the foreign agent may be the one who gets the notice of non-payment. And let's say responsibility had transitioned from the party who was handling the payment or handling the prosecution to after grant the company. And the foreign agent has to send the notice of non-payment to the appropriate party. So sometimes they get involved just because they're listed as the correspondence contact, and we'll talk about later how to make sure that even the foreign agent is engaged and involved in making sure things work correctly in the renewal process. So that block that I called the annuity payment manager, which is just a name I'm using here, from the point of view of the company who owns the patents that are being, for which the annuity payments are being made, this annuity patent manager could be the law firm, or it could be a commercial annuity provider. If it's a law firm, it means that the company representative is interacting directly with the law firm to provide information for the payments and payment decisions. The law firm may then be making the payment directly themselves. For example, many U.S. law firms make maintenance fee payments directly with the USPTO. The law firm may also be making the payment through their own network of foreign agents. Or the law firm could be working with their own annuity payment provider, which introduces another level into this particular scenario. And finally, the company could be working directly with an annuity payment service and providing instructions directly to the annuity payment service. When you have the scenario of a law firm that's working with an annuity payment provider, the law firm in that scenario really just becomes the middleman to communicate the company's instructions to the annuity payment provider. And it's very common for law firms to work this way and work with an annuity payment provider to do the annuity payments. But for the company in this scenario, this just really increases the cost due to having an extra layer in this particular process. And then another option, as I already said, was the company might just work directly with the commercial annuity payment service. And a few examples of annuity payment providers, there's several out there. Some are Thompson, CPI, CPA, or our sister company, Black Hills IP Renewals. Continuing on with a little more groundwork to set the stage for the more advanced topics, let's talk about the typical architectures of a renewals system. So most commercial annuity payment providers have software that I will call a back-end annuity system. That's the software that they're using to track the due dates, track what's paid, what's not paid, and that software often communicates with a docketing system that I will call a front-end docketing system. Records are typically added to the back-end annuity system by transferring them from the front-end docketing system. That could be the law firm's docketing system, for example, or the company's internal docketing system. And there's varying processes for this transfer. When the information used by the annuity payment provider is transferred from the front-end docketing system to the annuity provider's system, it's critical that the data in the docketing system is correct to begin with. And in some systems, in addition to the matter details being transferred from the front-end system to the back-end system, the annuity payment instructions themselves are also entered in the front-end docketing system and then transferred to the back-end annuity payment system. Now, so how are the annuity payment instructions collected? If it's a law firm managing the annuity payments, they usually get their payment instructions from the clients and then provide the instructions to the annuity payment provider if they're working in that middleman role. Often, the client has more than one person who needs to be consulted to get the payment instructions, and as a result, it can take multiple follow-ups with the client before instructions may be received by the law firm to pass on to the annuity payment provider. On the other hand, if a company is working directly with the annuity payment provider, they provide the payment instructions to the annuity payment provider, but they still may need to consult with multiple people internally, those decision makers, and follow up multiple times to get instructions. So those are a couple examples of how annuity payments are collected.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, what we're talking about right now, what Ann just mentioned on these ways of annuities being collected, these are the more complex scenarios. So the larger your portfolio becomes, the more potential room for error is going to happen. Just naturally, you have more people involved, there's more layers of communication. For example, if a company has a small portfolio, as Ann said earlier, patent counsel may be more intimately familiar with the patents themselves and therefore can easily make the decisions. But as the company grows or they start using external services, this can quickly introduce some complexity that could cause some errors.
That's a great point, Jackie. Going on, as you all know, annuity docketing errors, and I mentioned before, can expose an organization to significant liability. But what's surprising is that these errors usually don't occur where one would expect. Most annuity docketing errors are not a result of entering a wrong deadline in a docketing system. Rather, most annuity docketing errors are a result of confusing systems and processes that are associated with managing annuity payments. So next, Jackie and Carol are going to talk about some of the things that can go wrong in the annuity payment process.
Thanks, Ann. So the first one we'll talk about right now is file transfer errors. The main one here is the file number and serial numbers. This is key. You want to be able to get that bibliographic data in there. Obviously, filing dates and all that are very important as well. But I'll give you a very quick example that people may not think about. Chinese application numbers. They're very long. It's, I believe, 13 digits on the new format of a Chinese application number. And if anyone has ever tried to type in 13 digits, Excel likes to put that automatically in scientific format. If that's been saved and resaved multiple times, you suddenly can kind of lose the number and you don't know what that application number is. Yes, there are ways to make sure, but if someone's not paying attention, that can kind of just begin the error process for you. Or what I have personally seen a few times, but could definitely happen on this Chinese example and in others, is the Chinese application number has those digits and then it has a period and another number. So let's say that the Chinese application ends in 1.8. It will round it possibly in Excel to 2, which is now giving you a completely different application number. So you randomly now own a patent in your system that you didn't know you had. So now that you have that in there, you know, now you have this completely unknown application and you don't quite know what to do with that error on those.
So how can you prevent errors like that? Obviously, you're going to use Excel a lot of times. How do you prevent that?
Yeah, so I have kind of 2 tips for here. One would be if you are the customer, consider giving your annuity provider, whoever you're working with, an additional copy of the data in a non-Excel format. So when I say Excel, I could also mean CVS. I mean a spreadsheet. So put it in something like a PDF or image, something that doesn't change every time you open it and you don't have to really save anything. This is very helpful. People who should be entering data in your system should be well-versed in what application number should look like. So if they don't see that 0.8 or a point something in a Chinese application going back, they can then refer to that PDF to go, oh, it rounded it. I now know that there's an error here. The second, which is a little more optional but is very helpful, is checking some public data. So again, having someone recognize that for some of the trickier countries, going back to the Chinese example, if it did round it to 2, if you went to try to go verify it publicly on the Chinese website, you would find that either one, that patent doesn't exist, or that it's not your patent on those. Another variation of serial numbers going wrong is, as I kind of alluded to a little bit, you have the wrong serial number. You actually put the wrong serial number into your application, and that triggers a renewal date based on that, and you end up paying the wrong annuity. You are definitely helping out another company out there, kind of paying it forward, so to speak, but then you still have the challenge that you have to still pay the patent that's yours. Patent offices don't care that you paid the wrong one. I don't recall any countries off the top of my head that will appreciate a mistake and refund on that way. So you're kind of in it for both of those countries or both of those applications, and that can kind of get costly. So you definitely want to get the information in there correctly the first time. And the second and third bullet kind of meld together a little bit for me. Misplaced files, particularly if they're physical files. You know, you miss a sheet of paper that has a list of data on there to get into your system. But one that's becoming a lot more common is the selling and transferring party fails to send a complete list for various reasons. And a complete list, most people would say, oh, they just didn't include one sheet of patent numbers. No, I've seen that. It's a little more nuanced. To me, a great example of this is some European countries. You know, backing up just a moment, when a merger and acquisition is happening, yes, IP may be included, but if you think about it, they have so many things that they're juggling. They're juggling employee listings and physical assets and so many other aspects to selling or buying a company that sometimes the IP information can just get kind of quickly put together in a list and everyone thinks that they know what they're talking about. Then when you hand that list over to someone to enter in your system, they might need some additional information on that. So it's a great starting point, but sometimes those lists don't have everything that you would need to onboard. So back to my European example, if you were doing a merger and acquisition, let's say you have a European application. Very little quick background on a European application. You prosecute in Europe. It's this kind of regional patent office. Once it grants, you can pick what European countries you want to designate. So for example, you could pick France, Great Britain, and Germany. You pay in those countries and you now have patents in those 3 countries. So let's say during the merger and acquisition, they list the European application, but they failed to mention the France, Germany, and Great Britain ones. That's an example of an incomplete listing there. Or an even more common example, mergers and acquisitions take months. So at the time they put the list together at first, you have a pending European application, but 6-8 months go by and you now have a granted European application and no one thought to update the schedule with the 3 additional countries. So ways to kind of not prevent that, but things to think about are, you know, if you're on the annuity provider front, printing out a list, talking over with your customer or your client and saying, this is what we have in our system, we're about to put into our system, here's some questions that we have. So start that communication early with that client or customer about what truly is in their system. Also, you know, if you're a customer or a client, take a look at that schedule before you send it to the annuity payment provider. If you yourself are well versed in the portfolio, take a look at it yourself or get the stakeholders involved to say, is this really the listing we want to send to a provider to start getting into the system?
Those are some great tips, Jackie. Earlier I said that the records are typically added to the back-end annuity system by transferring them from the front-end docketing system. So in view of that, one of the most important things that you can do to prevent annuity docketing errors is to make sure that the key matter information, like the serial numbers that Jackie mentioned or patent numbers, are entered correctly into your docketing system. If it's entered correctly into the docketing system, it should transfer to the back-end system correctly. So as a practice tip, it's a good idea to periodically audit the critical data fields that are needed for docketing, or not docketing, that are needed for annuity payments in your docketing system to make sure that they're correct when they're transferred to the annuity system. And that will help reduce the likelihood of docketing errors on the annuity front. Carol will now talk about other things that can go wrong.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, some other areas that can cause some errors are confusion over responsible party. Shared responsibility for payments is a major source of problems where one of the parties has a weak process. For example, there are some U.S. law firms that choose to make payments directly with the patent offices in certain countries, such as an EP pending application, Canada pending application, or U.S. Also, they use the payment provider then to make payments in the more complex countries.
So I can see how that could get confusing. How do you prevent that?
Well, one of the best ways is to communicate. You'll be hearing that a lot. But just to make sure that everybody's communicating, especially in that type of scenario where the customer, the law firm is handling pending applications, make sure to communicate status changes. Make sure that all parties involved know as soon as possible when there has been a status change. Another area is when corporations are taking responsibility for payments in-house. If you haven't done this before, then you may not understand the level of work involved, and so some people may get confused in that area. There could also be too many cooks in the kitchen, multiple people making decisions, and sometimes those decisions contradict each other. So again, to sound like a broken record, communicate. Also, some law firms require a handoff responsibility for annuities, but fail to properly instruct the annuity provider.
So I guess I'd add to my recommendation then to periodically audit critical data fields such as application numbers and patent numbers. I'd add to that the status of the particular application or patent as well, based on what you just said, Carol, because that sounds like that's key information to be transmitted correctly also. Are there other areas where there can be confusion, Carol?
Yes. When the law firm mistakenly thinks that the corporation is handling payments, but the corporation doesn't actually handle. So, for example, some countries may have some back fees. For annuities, they're included in the grant process. And so those back fees may need to be paid through the foreign agent. Or the annuity provider may have a policy in place where they do not pay back fees, and those must be paid through the foreign agent.
Okay, so in that example, the law firm's assuming the annuity provider is making the payment, but it's actually the law firm that's responsible for making that particular payment for back fees through the foreign agent. Jackie, are there examples where you've seen that happen?
Yeah, a good example of this is India. They have it where once an Indian application grants, you have 3 months not only to pay the grant fee, but all of the back due fees. So let's say it grants in the 11th year, you have to pay all the way through years 11 within 3 months. Now that timeline could go against or doesn't really line up with the annual deadline of a annuity, a typical annuity. So let's say something granted in September, you have till the end of December to pay all those back fees and the grant fee. However, the typical annual Indian annuity might not be till March. So you can see why maybe some annuity providers as a policy don't want to have to also know the grant deadlines. They just get to focus on when things are due annually.
That makes sense.
Another area where there could be a breakdown in the system is when the foreign associate is unsure of who to send annuity payment information to. This can result in important notices not being properly forwarded to the annuity provider. So again, going to say it over and over again, is to communicate. Make sure that everybody is communicating about where notices need to be sent, because, for instance, notices of non-payment could be sent to the wrong party, whereas it wasn't intended to not pay a matter, and so the notice of non-payment may have been sent to the foreign associate and they didn't know who to send it to or something like that.
Okay. And then are there situations in where you can wind up with double payments happening as well? Slightly different scenario from the notice of non-payment?
Yeah, you actually can. A great example of this would be, let's just take Europe, for example, because I know that can be a thorny one. So let's say you're getting really close to that annuity deadline. So the law firm gets an excited email from European counsel saying, this has not been paid, we need to pay this right now. Obviously, the law firm wants to react very quickly. They want their client's application to keep going. So within the hour, they respond back and say, yes, please pay, because of the time difference, right? Time is of the essence on that. Meanwhile, the company is still mulling it over. And they have their own annuity payment provider. And, you know, there was maybe a breakdown in communication to the law firm not to pay it through the foreign agent, but pay it through their annuity provider. So suddenly the company says, yeah, payment provider, yes, pay it on my behalf. So now you have the annuity payment provider and the foreign agent both going in at the patent office at the same time and paying that European renewal. Now, like most patent offices, they like receiving money, and they don't pay attention to how many times someone paid on the same application as well for the same year. So what they do is they'll happily take both of those, and at some point they go, oh, you managed to double pay us. But instead of refunding one of the parties, they say, nope, the refund process has to go through European Council. So they will give the refund back to European Council, which again, it's not the applicant. The applicant has now paid twice. So now the applicant has to get the refund only through their European Council. So that process can just be arduous and time-consuming, to say the least.
And the European Council is probably charging them for that service too, I would imagine.
That could be a possibility.
So, boy, again, here, great example. The error was not the docketing of the due date. Everybody had the same due date on their radar, but there's so many different parties involved in a complex process here that you wind up with the issue resulting from confusion over who's responsible, right?
Right. And as I point out, it's not necessarily an error in that scenario, but it does add to the complexities of annuity payments.
Exactly. All right. Well, Jackie, what else can go wrong?
Oh, I have a few more things, because what else could possibly go wrong? How about that data synchronization between the front end and the back end system? I'm sure this never happens, but in case it does, here's some things that could be a little preventative. The back end system, so kind of where the annuities piece is happening, requesting a full list of matters there and from that annuity provider, and making sure that that list corresponds to what's on your front end. Now, it may not match up perfectly because maybe the annuity system doesn't grab the U.S. pending ones, for example, until they grant, right? So I'd maybe manage your expectations from a customer perspective that it's not going to be an exact match, but at least the main annuities get in there, or the ones that require annuity get in there, I should say. Also know the frequency to which the front-end system is transferring information to the back-end system. We're a culture these days where real time is expected. However, that may not be the case. So knowing maybe it is real time, or maybe the front end at the end of every night will send information to the back end, or daily or weekly or monthly on that. But at least you can know and ask your payment provider how often that they talk to each other. So you can kind of manage your expectations, and if you make a change and you go back in there the next day and it's not there, you understand why. Also, if a malfunction were to occur, before that happens, talking to your provider to ask, when a malfunction happens, what's your notification policy? Will you automatically notify me, and then will you also give me a listing of what you have in your system when it went down? So I can do a self-audit if possible, and trying to quickly get back up to speed so your two systems are talking to each other. The second bullet, and for all of you customers or clients out there, I know you guys would never do this to us or to anyone, but inability to locate the client to get instructions. This is very similar to how I think about that emergency contact when you're flying. You want multiple ways to get a hold of you, particularly if you are the sole person making decisions. Having 2 phone numbers, possibly 2 email addresses, an admin or someone else who maybe can't make the decision but knows how to get a hold of you. Those would be all great ways to lessen the ability to locate you if an emergency instruction needs to happen. If this does tend to happen quite a bit, where you're finding that people are trying to reach out to you in an emergency manner, or on the annuity provider side, you're having a hard time locating a client, maybe it's time to have a discussion about setting the instructions to an automatic payment. This can lessen the fire drill that happens, and that way you at least avoid missing the deadline. Obviously, there's a financial responsibility there, but it may lessen those fire drills for you. The third one here, communication, it's coming up again, or documentation errors. Human error, it's one of those things that you will never eliminate, but you try to reduce it. And I would say try to minimize it by lessening multiple human touch points and automate when necessary. I'll give an example. Let's say your process, you receive the instructions, or you're sending the instructions, whichever hat you're wearing, by email, which means then the email, someone is reading that email and interpreting the email. A great scenario might be in the email you type, "do pay this matter," and in "do" you have it in all caps. A lot of people could misinterpret that, because caps normally means the negative in emails, or kind of has a, kind of pay attention to this, what's happening here, and it could be interpreted as "do not," and could go abandoned there. So if you had an online system where the company representative went in and just clicked a button to pay or to abandon, you kind of lessen that human error factor in there. And lastly, the fourth bullet, payment errors. No one wants to ever think about this. You have signed up with either the payment provider on paying these, and everything went right, but the payment isn't submitted. What can you do? I always think the best preventative solution here is to instruct in a timely manner so that the payment isn't being submitted at the last minute. And what does that mean for a timely manner? Different providers would have something different. It could be something like a month out, 2 months out, maybe even 6 months out. We're definitely talking a little bit longer term here. How does that help? It helps with if things go wrong at the patent office. For example, if a earthquake or a tsunami happened at the Japanese patent office, if you think about it, we're here in the US, there's a huge time difference. If you say, yep, we want to pay this, we have to reach out to you'd have to reach out to the Japanese patent office. If there was some force of nature that happened and they were down, you don't know if the Japanese patent office is going to allow extensions. But if you have paid 2-3 months ago and something happened, well, they have time to recover, or if there's any questions on making that payment, the provider can get back to you as a customer to resolve those and still pay it in a timely manner on those. For important cases, if you want to just keep checking the patent office's public sites, this helps if you are paying something at the last minute and you would kind of like to check, or if you have an important case that you just want to kind of keep an eye on. Note some patent offices, they are better at updating right away. Others may take a few weeks, but it is an option available to you. But if you're still in doubt, always contact your provider and say you'd like confirmation that patent X, Y, and Z did get paid, so that lessens your anxiety about that important application. And last but not least, if you're thinking that your payment provider, this has happened to you a couple times with them not paying, if they're becoming a little more unreliable or you're not trusting them, maybe at the end of the day, you need to consider looking at other options for annuity providers.
So Jackie and Carol, you've given some really good tips and recommendations as you've been walking through what can go wrong. But let's step back now and just summarize what we can do or what our audience can do to guard against missed annuity payments. Carol, can you start us off?
Yes. So one thing is to take extreme care when transferring responsibility of payments between parties. A good practice to have would be to have a stop-start date for the responsibility. As soon as you know that you're going to be transferring matters from one annuity provider to another, you would want to provide your current provider with a stop date, and then provide your new annuity provider with a start date. Some things to look out for when you're doing this is that ask your current provider based on the stop date how far up to that stop date that they will make payments on annuities. So for example, if you're giving a December 31st stop date and they will make payments up to 2 months, so say October 31st, then you would want your new provider to start on November 1st. So those dates may not match up, the stop-start date may not match up with each of the providers. Also, when you provide your current annuity provider with a stop date, at that moment you'd want to ask for a listing of all the matters that they have in their system for you, or a master list. And also at the stop date, you would want to ask them again for a new master list. And this is just to make sure that there weren't some matters that might come in or status changes between the stop-start date. Another area is responsibility is shared. Make sure that you have a very well-defined process in place. We keep talking about it, but communication is key. Make sure that everybody understands the process as well. Third is the process for file transfer. They should be well defined and managed at a top level so it doesn't get relegated to employees who don't know the big picture. We keep sounding like a broken record, but make sure that there is a defined process for the file transfers and that someone who understands all of the moving parts in the renewal process to make sure that the matters are open properly.
So Carol, you're emphasizing communication, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that the critical matter data in your docketing system is correct so that it's passed on to your annuity system correctly. So both of those things are very, very important. And then also make sure your foreign associates have clear instructions on how to handle notices of non-payment of annuities, particularly in the example where a notice of non-payment of annuity goes to the foreign agent because they were listed as the correspondence contact, but they're really not involved in the annuity payment process. And let's say they had been working with the law firm who was handling the matter during prosecution, but the foreign agent doesn't know that at the point that the patent granted, responsibility for annuity payments was handed back to the company. The foreign agent in that scenario would likely send the notice of non-payment to the law firm. The law firm might look in their docketing system and see that they're not responsible for it anymore, and that notice might not get to the party who needs to know about it. So make sure foreign associates have clear instructions on how to handle notices of non-payment. Carol, what else?
Well, in a perfect world, your annuity provider would like standing instructions of a default pay instruction. However, if that isn't possible for some companies or clients, at least to provide instructions as soon as possible. Again, as Jackie mentioned earlier, giving 1 month or 2 month instructions prior to the due date in case something does happen.
Yeah, and the last one here, all file transfers and new file onboarding should be monitored and double checked. I think this has been kind of a theme throughout here. The only thing I want to add is ask your annuity provider if they do verify information against public data whenever possible. This is a great way to objectively take a customer's or client's data. And I'm sure for all you clients and customers out there, it's perfect. But on the off chance there's a few missteps here and there with that bibliographic data, public data should be able to bring that to light. So they can compare, publicly what's the filing date out there to what you have in your system. And it just gives you a little bit of peace of mind and this kind of objective view as to the information that's in your system to get it cleaned up for the annuities to move forward in a more consistent way.
Well, Jackie and Carol, thank you for sharing the examples and the tips and recommendations on this topic. We really appreciate it. I'd like to remind the audience that questions regarding the subject matter of today's program can be submitted using the Q&A button on the control bar on your screen. If you have general questions about Black Hills IP services or processes, please contact our Vice President of Sales, Jim Brophy. His contact information is on the slide that you're looking at. It's also on the website. And today we've discussed annuity payment failure modes. More specifically, we walk through some groundwork on who the stakeholders are in what can often be a very complex renewals process. We looked at the typical architectures of renewal systems and discussed how annuity payment instructions are collected. And then we went into detail on where things can go wrong in the annuity payment process, and that is typically in the events around how instructions are obtained and information gets to the annuity docketing system. It's generally not as likely that it's in the due dates themselves. And then we just gave you some methods for guarding against missed annuity payments. At this point, we don't have any questions in the queue, so I just want to remind everyone that the slides and an audio recording of today's program will be posted on our website, which is www.blackhillsip.com. Actually, I have one question that's just popped up, so let's take that before we move on. That is, how many times should you notify a client they're responsible for the annuity if they do not confirm they received the first notification? So I'm sure that practice is going to vary from organization to organization. And I'd say, particularly from the point of view of a law firm, it's very important to have that whatever your firm partners decide documented, and to make sure that the docketing team or the paralegal or the annuities department follows that process and documents when they've followed up with the client. Jackie, do you want to add anything on what's the right answer on how many times you follow up?
You know, I think there could be any different type of scenario. I think it depends on, you know, how complex the client or the customer is, also how big the annuity provider is themselves. It really just, it's sometimes almost a gut check. I would say as many as it takes to get an answer from the client. And I know that that can sometimes be very overwhelming, and to feel like you're spending your whole day waiting for that client to get back to you. But on the off chance that it got sent to the wrong email, this is one of those situations of, if you're doing it by email, maybe calling them, or finding different ways to communicate with them than just by email. So there is no one answer for this. It's more kind of your gut feel for that client or customer, but I would say as many as it takes.
And a suggestion that just came in from another member of the audience is that they send a signature required letter to the client to absolve the firm of any potential issues, so that they have evidence that the letter was at least received and the request for instructions was received. And I think that's a great practice to adopt as part of your process. So you have an escalation probably, where you start with your standard procedure for requesting instructions, have some follow-ups. If you're not getting anywhere, eventually you get to the point where you're sending the certified letter for signature and saving that in your files.
Yeah.
Okay.
You hope you don't have to get to that point, but sometimes that can happen.
Well, great comments there. I would, given the amount of time we have left, I think I'm going to move on to what the next program in the series is. So the next webinar in the Docketing Excellence webinar series is on February 15th at 1 p.m. Central Time. The topic is the right way to calculate due dates in EP in China. We'll let you know what the right way is. To register for this webinar, go to the Black Hills IP website. Thank you everyone for participating today. We hope you will join us for this and other webinars in the Docketing Excellence webinar series. Thank you.